Welcome to another episode of STORYHIVE on location, Victoria. We're coming to you live from House of Owl, Victoria's co-working club for creators, located on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. Deep bow, deep respect, deep love to the original caretakers of these lands. My name is Jordan Dack, producer, poet, songwriter, and host of this deep dive into the creative process, creative or die. I'm sitting here with an absolute legend who lives at the intersection of the creative process and tech and the future and whatever's happening next. Kris Krug is there.
Hey, what's up, Jordan?
Chilling, man. How you doing?
Doing great. It's always great to be here in the Hoot Nest and in Victoria. So much like thriving creative activity happening here, man. So pleasure.
It is absolutely my pleasure to have you here. I'm looking forward to this talk. So, usually what we do in this conversation is that we skip right over the resume. We won't spend too much time on, your formative years necessarily. But what we will do is we'll go through some quick facts that may or may not be true. All right. And your job is just to let the audience know whether they are true. Okay?
Okay.
Let me see.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. It's a good time. Okay. So, wow.
Bring the heat, Jordan.
Bring the heat. Okay. Okay, so first fact. Kris Krug was originally born in Alaska.
False.
You guys can keep score at home, okay? Now, next fact. Kris Krug started a meetup group, a community of AI enthusiasts in Vancouver, and has grown to beyond 300 members recently.
More or less true.
Tell me more.
Not everyone's an enthusiast. We got plenty of skeptics, critical voices, all sorts of people who are engaged in the moment who aren't exactly enthusiasts.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. Okay, let's see. Kris Krug is not your real name. Your real name is Peter.
False.
False. Okay. Okay. Now, final question. The truth is that I don't have any questions. I'm just making this up as we go along here.
I don't know. You sent me about 30 questions earlier that were
pretty right. Oh, those ones.
Darn
Okay.
good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd love to just dive right into it, Kris. So, for those people out there who don't know who you are, how would you like really explain what you do and who you are to people when you first meet them? If they're like, "Hey, Kris, who are you? What are you all about?" What do you say?
I'm a tech artist. I've spent the last 30 years at the intersection of the internet and emerging media and art forms. And now I run a nonprofit called the BC AI ecosystem. So I'm the executive director of a nonprofit and a practicing tech artist.
Okay. That was very succinct. Thank you. Cool, man. So can you tell me a little bit about the adventure, the journey that took you from, would you say you started in tech or started in creativity or somewhere in between the two?
My dad, you said we weren't going to go down childhood lane, but my dad brought home a Apple IIe when I was like 12 years old and connected it via Prodigy to the internet, and the world opened up to me. And so I became a online guy in my early teenage years. This is like late 80s, early 90s. And so that was kind of my big first exposure to networks and the internet and connecting to other people in the digital space. And so I put myself through college building websites and stuff. And then I was sitting pretty with some friends who had built a company called Flickr right at the beginning of the kind of social media revolution. So I got to kind of sit front row seat for that empowering revolution for many people, and stuff. Yeah. And then, that launched me into my own creative practice around photography. And I got to travel the world helping other creative practitioners figure out like how to take advantage of the moment, how to make the most of this kind of like Web 2.0 moment where it went from just, building the website to publishing content, interacting with your fans, finding your voice, and like disintermediating from galleries and owners and, like agents and stuff like that. The people who had traditionally held the power structures of the creative industries, we saw a big shift there, and that led me here. I was hanging out on Galliano Island pandemic farming when AI reached its tendril out to my cabin there and really just kind of like lit my brain up. I started sleeping less and experimenting with a lot of these tools, and I got really lucky. I mean, it doesn't start with a happy story, but I got hacked really bad in 2017. And that had me pull back from the internet. I had lived a pretty open online life for, most of my career. And due to some Bitcoin shenanigans, someone wanted my wallet and came after me, and they wanted my Twitter handle. And anyway, I got hacked and brought to my very knees, digitally speaking, lost a main domain name that I'd had for a couple decades.
Jeez, did they get some of your coins too?
They got some PayPal money, but that was all insured and stuff like that. But no, in the end, it was mostly the things I lost were a couple primary email addresses that locked me out of everything and my main domain or whatever. But so anyway, I kind of like pulled back from the internet when I learned about AI. So I was a little like reticent to put myself out there into some of these Discord servers where you were generating Midjourney images and stuff like that, because they just looked like hacker chaos to me.
Right.
And so I stood up my own Discord server that day, installed the Midjourney bot onto it, and invited a few of my friends from kind of the olden days of the internet to that server. And that was the seed that became this kind of thriving community that we have today, where all sorts of artists and professional creatives are coming together to figure out, what exactly is going on in this moment. A lot of us are following our passions and curiosities down creative rabbit holes, and then, returning that in the form of, gallery works, presentations, demos to other people, teaching other people what we've learned, and stuff. And so it's become this kind of virtuous, online learning circle of other people that are just trying to figure this shit out,
Super cool. Yeah. Now, do you think that, have you been one in your past as a photographer, or even before that, staying back in the early days? Was the difference between art and tech distinct in your mind, or was it fairly fluid?
I tell you what, when I first got into technology, I didn't even know that you could live the life of a professional creative. In my family, there was doctors and lawyers and engineers and software developers, but I grew up in a pretty conservative religious situation where people that made films or were in bands or made art, they were considered worldly. Right. And not like in a positive way, right. Not like, oh, they're well traveled, or something like that. But it's like, no, that's not a desirable, I don't even want to say like line of work, because to be an artist isn't really a line of work. It's kind of a lifestyle, But so I didn't know a lot of people like that, and so there was definitely a big chasm between my tech work and my creative work there for a long time.
Yeah.
But through building websites at first for other people in marketing departments and stuff like that, I eventually stumbled into photography, and that was the creative key that unlocked the doorway to me being able to step into like thinking of myself as an artist and living that artistic, creative life.
Yeah. If you think about all the different arts, it would be hard pressed to find an art that doesn't involve tech to some degree, right? Even if you're developing your photos in a dark room, there's still technology involved. And we're going to dive a little deeper into the whole, the AI versus art, and even if that is a conflict and what that conflict looks like. So we'll just leave that alone right now. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about when you started to notice that AI was this thing that could change the world, could change the way that we look at things.
Well, my first epiphany about it was the very, very first time I was exposed to it. Someone showed me Midjourney, and we just got to having a creative imagination jam session.
Can you bring us into that moment?
Yeah.
If we were right there.
My friend James Lester, who runs the Sons of Vancouver distillery in Vancouver, came over to help me build 2 stills in my greenhouse on Galliano Island. And while he was over there, he showed me this thing that he had seen called Midjourney. Yeah. And Midjourney is an image generation tool that was run on Discord at the time. There wasn't a website. And you can, more or less, speak your ideas into existence. So you can say, black and white photography, circa turn of the century, wide angle, high contrast, film grain, Yosemite backdrop. You can just, and then you can start to, I call it an imagination jam session, because really the types of the craziest shit that you can think of, you can start to get out into the world, and it's just a fun way of creatively brainstorming and stuff. And I was captivated by it, but I pretty quickly saw even in that first session that this is going to change the way all professional photography stuff is done. Like, and what I mean, I don't mean the act of pushing a button or something like that, but like, you know, for big budget shoots, we're doing lots of client meetings, coming up with creative briefs, coming up with a budget and a schedule, and hiring, you know, models or actors and working with production people, you know, and then once we do those shoots, you know, we're refining those assets and turning them into other things and documenting our work and writing reports and sending invoices and all these things related to the production of professional creative works or whatever. And so the thing that got me at first was, oh, I'm never going to do a photo shoot again where I have other production people before I generate it in Midjourney first and get it all approved by the client. It's like, no, my creative time is valuable, and like my vision, and so I can like bring these ideas into the world with very little cost, show them to the client. I can even spec, you know, F8 Fujifilm, medium format, you know, 8K resolution, maximum bokeh, you know, whatever. You can spec the tech on it too. Key light and, you know, a backlight and hair light fill. You can spec all these things. And so you can show your ideas to the person that is both paying the bill and approving the final works before a model shows up or a light gets turned on or anything like that.
Yeah, that's right.
So that was the first kind of like epiphany I had. It's like, oh, this is going to change everything around how creative work is produced.
In that moment when you had that epiphany, I imagine there's probably excitement, maybe some goosebumps, maybe like, you know, just flashing visuals of what the future might look like. Whatever it was, your experience, was there any fear in your system?
The main fear I remember feeling was around joining Discord and getting hacked again.
Yeah, right.
I'm comfortable in changing technological environments, and like those create opportunities for little fish, or, you know, not the big fish, right? Like when a incumbent is disintermediated by an upstart company, it's because of technology and stuff like that, right? And so that's very much how I was able to ride the first couple waves, the Web 1 revolution and the Web 2 revolution. I was uncertain, and I still am very uncertain about where things are going, but I'm not super fearful about that in the way that you mean or whatever. Like I have a pretty like maybe pessimistic perspective about some bigger picture future things. I think some of the biggest concerns about AI is kind of the consolidation of power into the hands of a few governments or corporations, or, you know, rich tech haves and have-nots type thing, you know, and stuff. And so I do think there's a lot of things to be wary of and to like call out, hold to account and stuff like that. But those things are things that I think are amplified in the world around me that I already saw. So I already maybe had a
that's a good point.
Perspective against like governments, corporations, authority figures, power as it currently exists. You know, banks, telcos, governments, whatever. So it's like,
not that AI brought this all in. It was already there. And
but I think that this is the nuance. You got to be careful there. I'm not trying to be dismissive of it either. I mean, I do think that it represents a significant thing that we need to keep our eye on the ball on, because you know, those models plus these tools can enslave more humans than ever before. You know?
Very effectively and efficiently.
So I mean, but those things are things that I have my eye on and fight against for my whole life, you know, or whatever.
Yeah, so you came in with those values.
Yeah, so it's not like I'm mad at AI for those things or whatever. Those roads pretty quickly lead me back to systematic change I want to see.
Now, I'm not going to be able to really recall this with much detail, but I remember one philosopher talking about AI, and they were talking about how excited we can get about the newness of something, that many of us do find it convenient to let go of some of our values because we're just so excited about new. And you have to wonder how strong were those values in the first place, but there is something sexy and about newness. Maybe it's the dopamine factor that just wants to wipe things clean. We just get so excited about it that we are willing to make some compromise. Do you agree with that?
I think it's a really black and white way of looking at things, dude. I think you can be curious about the moment and you can be engaged in the moment, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you are sacrificing your values. I think that means some discomfort potentially and the ability to hold that contradiction, you know. But I think you can both be excited about the opportunities for personal transformation, for creative empowerment, for even some of the more highfalutin things, the curing of cancer, or the some of the things that the boosters tout. I think you can be interested and curious and engaged with those things, and you can also be critical and skeptical and calling out the things that are bullshit, and naming the harms and naming the biases, and more than a decade ago, I found myself doing a lot of climate activism work with my camera. I got invited through a lot of relationships here on the island and other things to be involved with the UN climate change summits, and some of the work of Zipporah Berman and some oil sands work and stuff. And so I invested many years in that. And a lot of times I would get critiqued pretty hardcore online. They're like, yo, bro, you're using an iPhone on a MacBook Pro, on a jet plane, flying to a climate change conference. Can't you see the fucking obvious paradox and contradiction here? Or, you're a hypocrite essentially, right? And I took it pretty hard. I was in my young 20s. I didn't have the full wisdom to kind of understand and comprehend that. And one of my mentors took me aside, and they told me about the abolitionists wearing cotton underwear paradox. And he said, do you think that, if you wanted to fight against slavery, that meant that you couldn't wear cotton underwear or, buy clothes from the store or something like that? Because that was the system that produced all of those goods of the economy that you lived in or whatever. And it's no, that's it's like a logical fallacy. You can be a part of a system and still hold it to a higher account, still critique it, still try to change it and make it better and reform it. You don't have to go live in the woods, disconnect yourself from all technology in order to critique this type of thing or whatever. And so I would encourage you both be excited and not give up your values. That's the hard part,
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get into that in a minute here about the idea of, I think you call it two full hands or both. What is it?
I've been giving a talk lately called Both Hands Full.
Both Hands Full, thank you. But just before we get there, I'd love just to dive into the real life Kris Krug world of day-to-day AI use, just so I can get a sense, because I'm sure your first introduction to Midjourney, that was mind-blowing, but things have come a long way, and I'd love to know what tools you use, specific tools, and how you use them.
Yeah, man. You're right. Things are changing quick, and we're in maybe the third or fourth epoch already of my AI usage. So I've and many of the world leading thought leaders are kind of talking about the same kind of stuff. It's I've retooled my creative pipeline many times in the last few years. And so when we were here last for the Elevation series talks, with a bunch of musicians, I was really into building knowledge bases and assistants. That was 15 months ago, something like that. So I was trying to build local knowledge bases of all the things that I had said or done or thought or wrote, and using that as reference to plug into the AIs, and then building, assistants for all the type. I had a little marketing assistant, and I had a sales navigator, and I had a board of directors that I could ask tough decisions to that would approach it from different perspectives. So that was kind of my approach, 15 months ago or so. Now it really is all about the kind of agentic coding and agentic workflows in general. And it's not just about code. Sometimes non-technical people tune out when they hear the word code, but code is how things come alive in the digital space, from visual projections behind a DJ to a website to a music portfolio to any of these things. These are all digital expressions that are coming to life in this way. And so I've been building all sorts of just agentic workflows now based on those knowledge bases. So,
and by agentic, you're meaning that the AI is actually doing tasks, taking actions on your behalf.
Yeah, to really break it down all the way, you could think about it as workers with names if you want to. I got one researcher called Jordan, and then I've got a documenter called Chris, and then I've got a coder called Jennifer or whatever. And so I come in and I'm yo, that course that I'm about to start delivering over the next 6 weeks on Friday, I want to turn that into an e-learning course as well with all the same modules, all the same exercises. So how about start by building me an interface and mapping my modules to a website, and then like, you know, researcher bot goes out and takes a look at my course, and then like, you know, UI bot goes through and starts to, you know, pull together some technical code, and then the marketing manager comes and layers on the text and stuff on top of that and stuff. So that's what I'm talking about agents, is like breaking those tasks down. You know, you speak them into existence or type them into existence. When I say speak them into existence, a lot of people are using tools like Whisperflow now and stuff. You know, I think a lot of when creatives and the creatives that you talk to me about sometimes, like I'm sure we'll get into this, but you're like, yo, dude, all the artists I talk to are totally anti-AI. And I'm like, BS, Jordan. There's no way, you know, or whatever. But let's just assume that's the case. Tools like Whisperflow are pretty cool because instead of typing all your stuff to your computer, you can talk all your stuff to your computer. And that's more profound than it sounds on the surface. It's not just about it being faster or not having to type at the laptop. These are a filter. They're a huge filter between our head and our heart and our ability to control the AIs. And so simply by speaking my instructions through a tool like Whisperflow into my computer all the time, I get, I swear, like 1,000% better outputs from the thing. They're even colloquial back in my language without it, without me asking it to speak or think like me, because it's doing that, you know, mirroring thing that you know, where it's like if I'm talking to it in informal, creative shorthand, it realizes that I am a designer who knows what it's talking about. It's gonna, like, talk back to me in that same way or whatever, you know, and stuff. And so I encourage people to break free from their fingers as their main way of interacting with AI as much as possible. That is one major unlock in terms of getting better results, let's say. But by better, I mean them being more authentically in your voice, style, worldview, things you care about, overriding some of those biases, some of the misogyny and homophobia, racism and transphobia that's built into these systems. You can do that by bringing your own knowledge bases to bear, and then, you know, speaking your prompts into existence.
Okay, so I'm imagining your daily workflow here involving these different agents, and
I can tell you my daily workflow this morning.
Yeah, tell me
It was like,
this morning.
I literally okay, so first thing I went to do is I went to ChatGPT, and I'm like, yo, I'm about to wake up all my agents for the day. So, and I want them to like dive into their GitHub knowledge bases and look at all the work we've been doing for the last week and identify gaps that they can, you know.
Okay, just a second.
Yeah.
Chris. Okay, so you're talking to ChatGPT, but are your agents Claude-based?
Yeah, I'm just trying to upgrade my shitty prompt that I'm about to speak to, I'm trying to upgrade it to a really good prompt before I go paste it into like 20 super powerful agents.
Okay, gotcha.
I've realized my agents are so powerful that it behooves me to take one extra step and like do the prompt upgrader type thing. So first I speak my thing into existence. I say like what I was just going to say. I'm about to go wake up my agents. Yesterday, they did a bunch of crazy work for me. They built out all these features and functions. They kind of went crazy. I don't even understand everything that's in there. So let's go through. Let's look for the gaps. Let's look for areas to do documentation. And let's build out today's work plan, roadmap, features, bug reports, et cetera, et cetera. So I paste that into GPT, into this little prompt upgrader I've built. Then I get back this sounds a lot more like computer language, sophisticated, detailed software engineer, architect level prompt. It's like, you know, you are an agentic coding assistant whose responsibility is to maintain a code base. You know? So I get this back, and then I go to these 20 agents that I talked to the day before, you know, or whatever. And it's actually not 20 agents. It's a bunch of agents in 20 projects. So I've got my personal website, my nonprofit website, my courses that I'm teaching, you know, all the different things that I'm working on or care about. I've got a GitHub repo set up for each one of those, everything I'm working on. And so, and inside those GitHub repos, there's a variety of agents, research, creative, coding, whatever. So I want to go in, I want to wake them all up, and I want to be like, yo, figure out where you are and what your job is. Take a look around and figure out how you can help me the most today.
Oh, so you're asking them to figure out what their job is.
Yeah, this is the whole like context engineering part of the whole thing. I was like, you know, like 15 months ago or 18 months ago, I'm building these knowledge bases and stuff. Now I've got these knowledge bases. I've got, for instance, if you're a musician, all the lyrics from every song on every album you've ever made, alongside every interview you've ever done, and every podcast you've ever done, and every set list from all your shows, and all of the graphics you've ever published, and export of your Instagram, you know, comments and posts or whatever, so that it like knows all these things about you. It's walking around with all of your world in its brain, you know. From there, you can be like, yo, I'm that guy who posted about my show on Instagram the last 3 days. Take those 3 days worth of posts and turn them into a vibe-coded standalone website about my tour, or write an article from those things about the things or whatever. And I'm able to speak my commands or my desires into existence for these agents that are sitting on top of these knowledge bases that I've lovingly and painstakingly gardened over the last couple of years, you know.
And with that much data that you've built, do you find yourself having to take a lot of time to get the bots to focus and to like really carve out what you want them to focus on and what not, because you've given them so much knowledge?
So you're getting into like more like intermediate and advanced stuff, and I'm so stoked about that. So I've got this main knowledge base that's my everything.
Yeah.
And when an energetic emergence appears within that knowledge base, I break it out into its own thing.
Okay.
So before my nonprofit was a nonprofit, it was some ideas in my knowledge base about where I thought the future was going, how I thought community was a big part of what, you know, we needed to build this community lifeboat so that we could help creatives moving forward. All these ideas were in my knowledge base. And then at some point, like, you know, you realize, oh, now's the time to form that nonprofit. So I go back into my knowledge base. I start to coax it around the idea of the formation of the nonprofit. And then I'm like, okay, now let's pull this out of this knowledge base and set up as its own thing. At which point it gets a new GitHub repo.
Gotcha.
So like if enough synchronicity or patterns happen around a particular thing, when there's reason to, so to answer your question, if all my work was to happen in one knowledge base with 20 different projects there and 50 different websites, you would be dealing with inefficient token usage, agents getting confused and hallucinating and shit like that. But I can break it out when it's time.
Gotcha. And when your nonprofit started to float to the surf, become something, was that something that you identified, or was that an agent or the work that you were doing with the agents that sort of highlighted it or brought it?
Yeah. No, it was a human thing. So our Vancouver AI events have been going on for like 15 months, and they had grown from like 80 people in my studio to over 200 people at the Space Center. And they're awesome. They are a genre-busting, silos-smashing good time, an exploration of what it means to be human in the age of AI. They're cool. And so people started coming to me, and they're like, this is great, but I want to run one in Squamish, or in Surrey, or on Vancouver Island. We've got a Comox chapter.
Okay, so there you go.
So once I was running Vancouver AI out of my company, and then once other people started kind of coming to me, and those things actually started to get legs, I just sort of like recognized that the framework for what I wanted to build was kind of emerging before me or whatever. And stuff. It was more like it was when the Surrey and Squamish meetup started that I was like, okay, we need to get this out of my company, make it its own thing. It's got traction. There's momentum there. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, I think it's a great time to talk about those AI meetups then.
Sure.
If you could. I'd love to hear more about them, because they started, it sounds like it's all been organic growth, but it's like an idea whose time has come, so it kind of builds quickly as well, because you've come a long way in a short amount of time.
You know what? Let's go both hands full in AI meetups at the same time.
Okay.
Every single AI conversation that I've been a part of tries to put you into one of two camps. You know, you got the boosters on one hand who are like, yo, get on board. AI's changing everything. If you don't like, you know, love AI, you're going to get left behind. And like, you know, and a lot of those people have a vested interest in that paradigm. They're venture capitalists, they're government people that are trying to spur innovation. They're tech people who are trying to have the next hot thing, you know. But they're all often very vested people in that situation. And on the other hand, you have like the complete like doomers, the resistors. You know, like think about the power in water. You know, how much data centers use, and like, yo, AI's been trained on all the stolen work of mankind, oh, it's full of bias, like misogyny, racism, homophobia, transphobia, fucking classism. You know, it's like full of these things, you know, and stuff. And so, well, like both of those things are kind of true. Yeah. And I was either could go to protest events and burn Teslas down, or I could go to like, yo, get on the AI hype train. Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, Well, those are both like lazy. Like the hype perspective, it doesn't tell you anything about like the harms or the effects on society. There's no critical dialogue taking place at most of these like startup pitch competitions or web summit or any of these kind of things. They're like super just like self-reinforcing circles of hype or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And the absolutist, purist, resistant perspective, well, it doesn't really tell you much about, it doesn't give you a roadmap what to do in this moment, like as your career changes or, you know, I've had like legit people, parents come to me and be like, me and my kid been saving up a college fund for 16 years and it's year 17 and they're ready to spend their money and they're like, hey mom, what should I study in college? And I have to, I'm freaking, I've had every answer to every question they've ever asked me and I don't have the answer to this.
Yeah,
and
I don't know. Question out there right now. Yeah.
So it's like, you can feel great about your purity, but that doesn't really tell you how to engage in the moment. And also like, please, critical purists, don't get up and walk away. What happens when you know, it's like, if you get up and walk away, you abdicate the throne to the tech bros and venture capitalists, right?
That's right. Like, yeah, we need you in the room.
We need you in the room. We need these critical voices there. And that means not just being in the room, but it means immersing yourself in the vocabulary and the nuances and the sophistication enough that you can hold an intelligent conversation about this stuff. Because there is a lot of hype on both sides, you know, and stuff, you know, like, for instance, a lot of the resistance to the ways that AI is currently being done aren't the only way that it can be done. It's just the Silicon Valley way.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, that's right.
So there's not only hyper-scaling, NASDAQ stock market driven, venture capital, you know, it's not, those aren't the only ways to do these things, you know, like turns out in our edge devices, in our phones, they all got GPUs and CPUs in them. There's a lot of unutilized processing power that can be harnessed to do inference and intelligent work, you know, on phones and stuff. There's a lot of open source work. There's a lot of like, here we've got, you know, green hydropower as like our main source of energy. We've got, you know, a lot of First Nations that are leading in areas like this and stuff. A real opportunity to build like clean, green, indigenous owned tokens that support reconciliation, things that we can be proud of and that power, you know, a creative future that's very much like the West Coast here. So anyway, I couldn't find any events I wanted to go to. Yeah. They were all hypers or doomers, right? Burn a Tesla or like drink the Kool-Aid type thing, you know?
Yeah, one or the other.
And so yeah, I just started getting people together in my studio to explore. Another thing is like, it's not just talks about business and optimizing your efficiencies and synergizing your optimization. You know, it's also like there's dancers that put sensors on themselves and have AI generate swarm-based visuals on the backgrounds and stuff. You know, there's all sorts of performances, researchers, people that aren't traditionally like platformed at the kind of more business events or whatever and stuff. And so I wanted to provide that, you know, genre smashing perspective on it where we can hear a talk about some ideas, watch a performance, explore some research, and kind of move between these modalities of like academia, performance, and culture, and then intellectual business stuff. Like,
so you kind of just said it, but if I was at one of these meetups, what would I see? What would dancers dancing, research being communicated on a stage, I assume? Is this
very, very officially, our program is 4 hours. We have an hour of networking, then we got a 2-hour program, then we got an hour of networking again.
Cool.
During the networking, I like to throw in some surprises. That's where you might experience, you know, people with robots that are using AI to map the interior of the space, using a LiDAR they busted out of a Xbox 360 or something like that.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to see. You know, we got one student in our community who built a American Sign Language to voice translator via Zoom or whatever, right? So it uses AI to take my voice and translate it into sign, but then also, you know, 3D map your body as you're signing and translate it back into subtitles or whatever. So yeah, during the first hour of networking, that's when we got like demo pit, surprise performances, stuff like that. Then we got our 2-hour program. We do an Indigenous welcome at the beginning. We've got this board member, Carol Ann Hilton, who's runs the Indigenomics Institute. I've gotten to do a lot of work with her in the last few years. And, you know, before she joined our board, she invited me into ceremony and talked to me a lot about centering that practice of ritual and ceremony before we enter into the work. It's just such a great way to, beyond the respect and acknowledgement of the land we're on, the welcome and stuff. It's a great way to get everybody on the same page and in the same headspace, build that container of trust where you can have maybe not difficult conversations, but conversations about difficult topics in a way that no one walks away from feeling good. So anyway, we start with a indigenous welcome, but it's often a song and some words or a blessing, and stuff. My buddy Anthony Joseph from Squamish Nation's been doing a bunch of those, and it's been pretty cool. Since we've done like 30 of these events over the last 30 months, and he's probably done 12 of them or something. And so he's worked his way through his back catalog of songs. He keeps trying to give us new songs every time he comes and does a welcome. So I feel like I've heard like way more Squamish songs than I've ever had an opportunity to hear anywhere else. Right. It's pretty cool. And then we got Gabriel George Sr. from Tsleil-Waututh Nation and Nessa Gonzalez from Squamish Nation. All these people participate regularly. And so, yeah, that's how we get things kicked off. Then we got our community's freaking blown up, man. So we have this like community announcement section which is just a chance for all the like spokes to report back to like the mothership on what the heck is going on in these sub communities that have sprung up. We got like an AI and education group, an AI and life sciences group, this group of philosophers called Mind, AI, and Consciousness that does these super intellectual academic. There's probably of the 20 people that meet in that group on the monthly, probably 12 of them at this point are like PhDs in AI or ML. They're first order robotics researchers or other things. And so that's pretty fun these days, like letting all the cool shit from all the different tendrils of the octopus bubble up into the
is there an artists faction? Is there a group of creators?
Absolutely.
A subgroup?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a creativity and design subgroup. Cool. But I also, our AI film club is one of the coolest things we got going on. So, Vancouver's a hotbed of animation, special effects, video games, film, Hollywood North type stuff. Well, talk about an industry where AI like non-consensually came in and kicked over the table and started eating out of the refrigerator. And film, man. like these guys talk about fear. These are people with $150,000 a year jobs, that worked their way through the sweatshop part of the film industry to hold these positions of effects director or, and this is where I ain't trying to have a fight with you, but, you can't tell me all artists are against AI because there's plenty of artists that I'm in first order relationship with that build the world's video games, special effects, animations, films, whatever, that are first of all, they're technical already. They already had GPUs in their shop. They were using them for rendering, lighting, shading, all these types of things. So there's definitely, there's one part of the curve that's burying their head in their sand. There's one part of the curve that is like maybe not asking questions and just going head over heels in the technology direction. And then there's everybody else in the middle that's trying to figure it out, to figure out what it means for our careers and for our kids and for our futures.
Well, to that point, let's pause for a quick second. Eric, how are we sounding? Yeah, it's good? Okay, just want to make sure before we keep going. So here's a contrast for you. So I'll speak to somebody here at House of Owl, let's say, and a musician, songwriter, someone who spends a lot of time in the studio, and they're worried that, hey, AI is going to come along and take away their job in the studio. It's going to start mixing music better than anyone else can, even though it is a subjective art. But then that very same night, I'd go home and I'd listen to a podcast, and I'm listening to some of the most successful engineers, audio engineers and producers in the game, and their conversation about AI is they are on the complete other side of the spectrum. They don't even mention the ethics. They don't even mention any downside to AI. It's all they just skipped that conversation, and they've already integrated it into their workflow. They're mixing and producing 3 times as many songs as they were last year at this time. They're making 3 times as much money, but it hasn't threatened their livelihood yet. It's only multiplied it. Where the other artists that I was speaking to, they were already seeing it as this might take away my job. And this is a question that I have too. There's a lot of artists who I've seen speak about the ethics of AI, but as we move through the conversation, it seems that they're more talking about that they're not, like they might lose a job, which is different. Which is also a concern and very justified concern, but it's different than threatening art as we know it, you know?
I think it's a really useful distinction. I was thinking as I was tracking your question, I'm like, for the purposes of this dialogue and in some of the conversations I have, there's like creative professionals and then there's artists.
Yeah, that's right.
A lot of artists are creative professionals and some creative professionals are artists. But I think it's probably useful to break those things apart because the creative professions are changing for sure.
Yep.
And yet I think art is probably more important than ever. The people that you mentioned at the podcast, I don't know them, so I shouldn't stick up for them. But you shouldn't assume that they're not concerned about the ethics at all and that they just passed through that gate and just started adopting it. Like maybe they spent 18 months. Yeah, maybe they spent 18 months trying to figure out where they stood on all these things, you know, and stuff. And like maybe, like me, the documents they're attaching to every talk they have with AI about anything is their worldview and values, their perspectives, and their AI policy.
Yeah, so great point.
Every conversation they're having with AI is inside the garden that they've built of values, ethics, vocabulary. Here's a bunch of words I say because I'm anti-colonial, anti-racist. Here's a bunch of words I never say. These are attached to every single conversation that I have with AI. Yeah. So maybe that, you know, those guys have passed through that gate already more so than that they don't care about it. Or whatever, you know? So in terms of your friend or your colleague losing some of their professional creative work because of AI, especially like the audio production stuff, I think that's real. And I guess the other thing I would say is the other people you mentioned on the podcast, they're just trying to make the most of the next couple of years when they're talking about I make 3 times as many podcasts and I'm 3 times as productive. They're not necessarily talking about what happens after that.
Yeah, they're not talking about 6 years from now.
That's right. Yeah. So obviously people that explore this stuff early, build it into their pipelines and workflows will have an advantage over their colleagues or their peers who haven't integrated any of those things. But now this studio House of Owl member puts on a different hat as an artist, and they're like, yeah, but what if that plays out to its logical conclusion? That's great that you're 10% ahead of the curve and you're 3 times as productive, making 3 times as much money as you used to be. What about after that? So they're probably, and this is the confusing state of the moment and the contradiction we have to hold, quickly walking back and forth between flopping on their artist hat and worried about like what are we all going to do for meaning and purpose and fulfillment in the future and what is the role of truth and beauty in art at all. And this whole like, yeah, but I charge people $55 an hour to do that same type of studio audio sound updates or whatever. And so I'm sympathetic to this perspective. I'm definitely more sympathetic to it than I am to the booster perspective. So I think that both ultimately, kind of fall short.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wasn't going to jump to this question. This feels like, in a way, the question at the heart of a lot of these conversations. But let's just say it is, what does it mean to be human in the age of AI?
Yeah. For me, it means like knowing which things I want to hang on to, no matter how good the AI gets at building synthetic content. It means asking ourselves like what, looking beyond the like, yeah, I'm 3 times more productive in this moment, and looking beyond the effects that it has on our institutions, like schools, like families, like churches, like governments, like countries even, and stuff like, making sure that the benefits, the part that people are excited about is very likely that the part that they're excited about won't be evenly distributed. So keeping the humanity centered in the AI means like, if this is going to be used to have an intelligence explosion, which is going to result in a golden age of economic development, how do we build systems that ensure that gets equitably, if not evenly, distributed? So it doesn't just end up in a few hands. It's like that when they build a data center in downtown Vancouver, that all that tokens doesn't just get used for dual use defense technology. That some of it gets allocated to artists and cultural as a line item, as a commitment. 20% of the tokens that come out of this factory will be used to support culture and the arts in the communities where this stuff takes place, you know? Those are the types of things I think it means when it's like, we got to live in the future, you know? And so using the things that people are excited about, the tokens that are created, the wealth, the power, the intelligence, the creativity that's created to benefit individuals, communities, citizens, our country, those types of things.
Yeah. And that's great, because I think the other thing that I noticed from a lot of creatives is that they hold a very strong opinion because they don't know what other options there are, what other opinions there are to hold. And they might also be uncertain of what they can do with their art or in their lives to actually, you know, create a future where the human is still, you know, centered in the conversation. And so is there something that you could suggest that artists can do from their place and from their art that, other than, you know, staying engaged in the conversation, but actually, if we are to nudge this into a direction that feels ethical, is there something that artists can do from their position, not as a politician, you know, not as a CEO, or how can they influence the future?
Okay, I'm really excited to answer this question because I think I actually have something that will like be meaningful to people or whatever, you know, and stuff. And so, nobody asked for this moment. I had 140,000 photos on the internet under a Creative Commons license. AI just came in and slurped them all up, trained itself on my data, and then started, you know, selling that as a subscription off to other people and stuff, right? And so it's like no one asked, but here it is, right? And so my pretending that it didn't happen doesn't make it go away. Yeah. And so I seek agency in this moment. I don't want to feel like the world is happening to me and there's nothing that I can do about it and stuff. And that's how I think a lot of people feel, is they didn't ask for this, they don't like it, they don't agree with it, it rubs against their values, and they don't like where we're going, and I'm very sympathetic to that kind of stuff, you know, whatever. Yeah. So one of the things I've been able to do to reclaim my own personal agency is using the mirror of AI to point back at my own creative work and my archives as a way to understand my unique Venn diagram of creative weirdness. And so, I mean, literally like feeding hundreds of thousands of photos to AI tools and training models that have never seen a human face before on only the portraits that I've ever made, such that all of this particular AI's understanding of what a human face looks like is built purely on my stylistic choices through my cross-process street portraiture from the, you know, late 2000s or whatever. You know, so I think that the most useful value of AI that I found at all has been as a mirror to better understand my own practice, output, tendencies, and even like, I'm 49 years old. I've produced stuff for 30 years online on the internet. Synthesizing the patterns from those things is not that easy of a task, man. I've given hundreds of 3-hour lectures and interviews across, you know, like, you know, decades or whatever, right? Yeah. Well, AI is a great way to do that. Take a look at these 30 talks that I've given over 30 years, you know, and start to analyze trends, patterns, how I talk, which examples I give, what my unique special sauce is, compare this to people out there in the world, tell me areas that, you know, you think would be adjacent to this I should lean into, stuff like that. So really using the tools to analyze your own work, whether it be poetry or paintings or photography, graphic design, I mean, you know, writing, go on and on, right? Like anyone who has published, and I don't mean published in a magazine or on the I mean like out there in the world, finished creative works, those are things through which we can analyze and learn about ourselves and the stuff. And that is a great starting point, because the artifacts, the digital artifacts that come out of that self-discovery process using AI as a mirror to analyze your own work and creative output and stuff like that in career, those artifacts are the things that I was talking about that ground all your other conversations with AI into the future. So you're like, yo, here's art that I made. Here's why I make art at all.
Yeah.
And here's who I am. Now let's have a conversation about something.
Yeah.
Greek, you know, or politics in Canada or whatever. It's coming through all those perspectives. So I feel like that's a great way to mitigate some of the fears while engaging with the moment and not have it just be like a make work project where the documents or the artifacts that come out of that exploration process are super useful. And it will ground all future conversations with AI and improve the results significantly for a person.
That's super interesting. It kind of feels, you know, like one of the, of course, central questions in philosophy, spirituality, and psychology is who am I, you know? And to leverage the power of AI in that conversation is super interesting. Is there any problem or concern that AI might bring its own biases already into the conversation? Is that while you're trying to discover who you are through its potentially biased lens?
Yeah. I would definitely have a critical mind towards that type of thing. But the example that you just gave, assembling, let's just say 10 blog posts or 10 interviews or 10, even like, let's say you're a yoga teacher and you record your yoga teacher sessions or whatever, and you've got 10 90-minute transcripts of you leading classes. Put those 10 transcripts in and ask that same question, who am I?
Yeah.
Just see what comes out. You don't have to agree with it.
Yeah.
You don't even have to like, you get to weight how much value you put on its opinion. Totally. But I tell you, it will be insightful. Whatever it
will be
insightful.
Yeah, and you don't need to
reject it. You can say you missed this whole thing, you know, or
I think that's
you didn't
beautiful.
consider this other facet of my career. But that's the exploration process, right?
Yeah.
The yoga teacher feeds 10 transcripts of 90-minute courses in, asks who am I, gets back this thing that they said misses this whole facet of themselves. And now you get to go and be like, yeah, well, go grab your Buddhist journals that you did while you were in silent meditation. Let's augment this conversation with not just your yoga classes, but your silent meditation journals.
I love that. And also, you know, I love keeping a critical mind. And when the AI speaks back, says, this is who you are, or this is who I hear you to be, you might even find that there's an absence there that you notice. Like, that's not actually me. You're missing this piece, you know. I remember my meditation practice goes back like 30 years now, but I still remember the first time I sat on a pillow in grade 11. I had no idea what I was doing, but I grabbed a book off my parents' shelf, who they were many years meditating. And the first instruction was to, you know, clear your mind, do all the things, but then just playfully. And the key word was playfully, and with curiosity, ask, who am I? And it wasn't like, who am I, and search with fervor and get attached to the answer. The key was playful and be curious, which is also be critical. You know, what emerges, don't believe everything you think, and don't believe everything that comes out of AI too. You know, so I think that's just such a brilliant asterisk to include in all these conversations.
I love calling out the playfulness part. That very much defines my relationship with AI. When I told you about those Midjourney imagination jam sessions, that sounds like play, if nothing else, right? 100%. Or whatever. And so a lot of the play part happens on the generation part of generative AI. Me going down different ideas, even like reference material. Let's talk reference for a second. Painters. Yeah. Walk around your house, photograph your favorite 10 paintings. Attach those to a ChatGPT conversation, and then put in your journal from that morning. Be like, make an image in my style on this thing that I care about with 10 paintings that you made attached to it, and be prepared to be, you know, flabbergasted. But so the playful part for me is the generation side. The work part, the critical part, the creative professional part is like what you leave on the cutting room floor. Yeah. That's right. So I don't really think that like your creativity is defined by what you publish. It's really truly defined by all the shit you leave behind you. All the, even this, you know, interview that we have right here will probably go on for 2 hours. Probably half an hour of it will air on TELUS. And you know, it's really the good editor. He's good because of the stuff that he cut out, because of the space that he left around an emotional beat or something like that. You know,
absolutely.
And so I like to do both. I like to flex my generative, brainstorming, expansive mind, on one hand.
Yeah.
And I like to sift and sort through that and ask, like, what does it mean? Does this matter? Why would I choose this? And stuff like that. And then iterate upon the choices. So I'm choosing one out of 100 things and then iterating upon the one that has been chosen.
Cool. So what does play look like right now for you in the world of AI?
The ability to create like infinite possibilities without a lot of like cost or like friction or whatever kind of stuff, right? Like even the way I was talking to you about the way I'm interacting with my agents, I'm like, look at all the stuff that we've done this week. It's been significant and it's been pointed in the direction of this particular goal. Let's get in there. Let's do some research and let's get in on the old stuff and let's figure out all the coolest shit that we could build in May of 2026, AI centric or whatever. And stuff, so.
I thought it sounded very productive, but I heard joy and fun in your voice when you were talking about it.
Oh, so, it's
both.
I'm extremely powerful right now in the way that I can think about this stuff on like a meta level. Like even the like going to the prompt upgrader to get a really good prompt before I go spend 20 agents time churning off down those paths or whatever and stuff, And there's like an ethical AI kind of like angle to that too, which is like, if you're going to be sitting there with both hands full, critical of its impact on the environment, but also curious and wanting to engage in its transformational capability, why don't you make whatever effort you can to be as efficient as you can be or whatever, stuff. And so like simply by upgrading the prompts before I run my agents, that's a good way to do it. But and this is where you get to see my real ability to hold like the contradiction or whatever, which is like, a lot of those actually, let's just, we'll scratch that one. Sorry.
Okay, sure.
Lost the plot there for a quick second.
No problem. So I think it's a great moment to just dive into what you're working on now, what's exciting you right now. Before this conversation, you sent me links to a few cool things that you're working on. Can you speak to what Kris Krug's all about right now in this moment?
Yeah. I'm launching a responsible AI certification program for professionals that work in the AI space on Friday.
Okay.
With Sarah Downey from Victoria here and Martin Lopatka from Vancouver, who's like a PhD machine learning guy, used to work for Mozilla. And so the idea is there's a whole bunch of people whose job has become governance, ethics, and responsible use of AI inside of corporations. And in many cases, they don't have the frameworks for dealing with this kind of stuff. So I've been trying to roll out a kind of like a professional project manager type certification where you want to add the letters to your LinkedIn at the end of your name to say I'm a project manager, but I'm a professional project manager. I've studied, all the frameworks and, work in this space or whatever. So on Friday, I'm really happy. We're going to launch in the Responsible AI Professional Certification Program. Sold out. We've got like 30 participants out of 30. And I'm trying to launch a digital version of it at the same time or whatever.
And who are these people that have signed up? Are they all work for corporations or organizations? And
some of them are executive directors of nonprofits who's like, my board says we got to figure out AI this year, and I want to do it in a way that doesn't make all my employees quit.
Yeah, that's right.
That's actually
a pretty common conversation.
That's a pretty, real use case.
That's real use.
Board said figure out AI. Staff's like, F no. Totally. And so I'm trying to figure out how I can implement this in a way that feels good to me and to them, and also, delivers on my fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah, right.
I see a lot of people that are AI ethics and governance people inside their org, HR people. Much like the web in Web 2.0, who owns AI has yet to be figured out yet because it touches everything. It touches HR around hiring. It touches technology around coding. It touches marketing in a variety of ways, executive strat. It touches many departments or traditional like functional roles inside corporations and organizations. So we haven't quite figured out who owns it yet, as it touches so many things. But and then there's a whole emergent class of like, innovation change agent type people. These are AI consultants that are ahead of the curve, vis-a-vis 80% of their peers or whatever, and are helping to they're essentially like the tip of the spear. They're out there learning about this stuff, experimenting with it, and then bringing it back and selling their expertise to other organizations as consultants.
Okay, gotcha.
So we've got a lot of people there who are trying to differentiate themselves from other people in the space. And
yeah, it's brilliant. Okay, cool.
Thanks.
You also sent me another link. What was it, Punk AI or?
Yeah. So okay, I've been having so much fun lately, turning things into other things using vibe coding.
Okay.
So in this conversation, we've touched on some interesting things, and we have a transcript of it, from the audio. Well, that transcript is what LLMs eat for lunch or whatever. So we could take from this transcript here. We could say, here's two guys having a conversation about AI, creativity, and the arts. Let's build some diagrams, examples, exercises, thought experiments around the stuff that they're talking about there. Right? So I've launched 2 websites in the last couple weeks, one called Both Hands Full, one called Punk Rock AI. And these are the transcripts of my keynotes turned into online learning modules for other creatives and artists and stuff, where they can get in there and they're like, oh, Kris says I should have an AI policy, a worldview and perspectives document, and a voice and style guide. How do I do those? Well, I got a little tool you can put your blog into, put your Bandcamp site into, have it analyze that stuff and spit out here's, based on your lyrics, what you feel about the world or think in your heart about, your values or your worldview, your perspective and stuff.
So, brilliant.
I've been trying to, repurpose, talks, transcripts, and things like that into other creative assets along the way, launching the courses. The nonprofit's really kind of thriving. We launched that Comox chapter. We've had a couple events up there. We've got 70 people in that community that have come together and are supporting the events, and a couple little rural sponsors the local artisan cheese factories come to the table with
I love it.
Refreshment table sponsorship
and on that note, I mean, in the lineage of tech and AI advances, where does West Coast Canada or where's BC? What role does it play that you see in the lineage of all of this?
Well, I think that we stand on the shoulders of giants in some ways, and also we've missed some boats in other ways, but we're kind of sitting pretty, I feel for the future. And so I'll unpack that a little bit. So we've got one of the best supercomputers in Canada for doing AI in the SFU network. In fact, it's so good that they are making a case to the federal government right now that of all the allocation of AI dollars that are coming to the West Coast, that they should take 100% of them.
Wow.
Because they do have the most advanced supercomputer in Canada. Unfortunately, in some ways, those things matter in this race that we're in, even though that's maybe not the healthiest way to look at it as a race or whatever. And so we as Canada, if we're trying to define a sovereign AI identity that's different than America and different than China, maybe we should invest 100% of our budget in this one major supercomputer center of AI, What was your question? I lost it.
BC.
Oh, yeah. Fuck. So standing on the shoulders of giants is where we were. So we've got bona fide chops here. We've got Dr. Philippe Pasquet's Meta Creation Lab at SFU at the School of Interactive Art and Technology. This has been a lab for music AI and creative AI that's been around for 20 years. This guy is a very well-cited researcher and professor. He built the tool called AutoLoom that I use to train my own AI model on my own photography. When I said that I taught a computer brain what faces looked like, that was using the SFU tool, AutoLoom. So we've got research labs. We've got this infrastructure around the supercomputers and stuff. And so and these tenured professors, academic legacy, we've got a lot of those types of things in place. Unfortunately, we sort of missed the boat with the federal allocations of billions that was received by the Vector Institute in Toronto, Mila in Montreal, which has 700 AI and machine learning researchers funded by the federal government there in Montreal, or AMI, the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute in Edmonton. These are 3 centers of Canadian AI excellence that have been funded by the government to the tune of $1 billion. Now, this happened several years ago, so they've actually done economic impact studies on these things, and those things have returned 4 or 5x the economic impact to those 3 metropolitan areas, Edmonton,
Already.
Toronto, and Montreal. Yeah.
Jeez.
So the investment of $1 billion into Mila in Montreal
Yeah.
by the federal government has resulted in $4 or $5 billion in economic development. This is like conferences, labs starting up, startups, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So there hasn't really been a voice of the BC AI ecosystem until we started.
Mm-hmm.
And so we haven't had a chance to clearly articulate our West Coast advantage out here around clean energy, around indigenous owned energy production, you know, around creativity and ethics and the arts and stuff like that. Like, we're not Toronto and we're not Montreal. We do have a different perspective. And so a lot of the work that we're doing as a nonprofit and association is building the coalition, politically organizing, and then putting those messages out there into the federal government.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I got invited to Minister Evan Solomon, who's the Canadian AI minister. He had an AI and Culture Summit in Banff just over a month ago. And this had all the bigwigs there, the people that represent the film directors, the people that represent the screenwriters, music lyricists, even things like museums and opera, and all the cultural producers of Canada were there trying to figure out, like, the government wants to just, like, obviously, like, fund technological infrastructure, but by doing so, they do so at the cost of the cultural producers of Canada if they don't have a line item for them as well. And so people are trying to figure out what their place in the future is and stuff. And so that's what we're trying to do with the BCAI ecosystem. We're trying to rally the troops, come together, put our needs in the middle, form a situation that's bigger than any one company or nonprofit or institution, and essentially rally the federal government for some of those $30 billion of earmarked Mark Carney AI money.
Wow. And when you are, you know, when it comes to the point where you actually get to communicate your message, your vision to the government, are they, I mean, I deal with this conversation all the time, and we're constantly having to talk about how there's a return on investment when it comes to art. And we rarely get to just speak about the value of art as art. You know, it always has to be tourist dollars, or how can we leverage this to some sort of payoff down the road. Is that the conversation with AI in general? Is there a arts, culture, and human evolution, or the philosophical evolution of the human species, or is it all about the return on investment?
A lot of our conversation with people like Minister Mark Miller or Minister Evan Solomon or Minister Gregor Robertson centers around trust. And it has to do with, like, building social license and trust around this kind of stuff. Like, we can have these technological breakthroughs and AI, NVIDIA factories, you know, or whatever, but unless the artists and cultural producers are along there helping figure out how to make sense of it and what this means for society and our lives and the rest, well, it's going to be hollow, and it's going to be an extractive, Silicon Valley driven, not us process or whatever, right? And so I think that a lot of people do understand the role that culture plays in kind of making sense of this. And I think that, you know, if we speed off into the future without bringing arts and culture along the way, we're going to end up as a vassal state of California.
Yeah. 100% agree. Okay. A couple more questions for you. Our time's just flown by. But is there anything currently that you would refuse to use AI for? Any task? Is there anything that you wouldn't use AI for right now in your life?
Yeah. Well, my claim to fame is as a documentary photographer and filmmaker.
Right.
This is an area where, okay, let me, like, now I have to dissect your question a little bit.
Go for it.
You're talking about the creative outputs. You're like, you know, no, I would never replace a portrait of a community member with an AI generated portrait of a community member. I would never generate documentation of a meetup as, you know, instead of bringing a photographer that would actually be there, you know, but there's plenty of things that are short of all the creative works that involve engaging those photographers to do documentation of my monthly meetups. That's super useful and valuable, like just maintaining a CRM with all these people's photos tagged and titled and archived and, you know, like indexable.
100%. I mean, you take any artist, and about 75% of their time is doing, you know, art adjacent work or art work that is used to promote or propel their art.
Focus on the art adjacent work and
Totally.
don't focus on the artwork, or whatever.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing is like transparency on this is like super important. And I've had a
Mm-hmm.
couple like hard lessons. One time a few years ago on my mom's birthday, when voice cloning had just come out, I had generated some poem about my mom's life, and then I had my voice clone read it, and I had it sent it to her as an MP3. And I didn't hear from her for a few days, and one day we were chatting again, and I was like, yo, Mom, what'd you think of that like deep fake birthday greeting or whatever? And she was like, what do you mean?
Oh, no.
And I was like, the fake voice thing about the poem thing or
Yeah.
whatever. And she was like, and she cried. Mom cried. She's like, I already get phone calls during dinner from deep fake people trying to sell me stuff. I don't know who's who and what's what, or whatever. And like, now I don't know the sound of my own son's voice. Like, what kind of world do I live in, So transparency and disclosure especially like when these most intimate relationships. I'll tell you one more story.
Please.
I never told this in public, but sort of recently, we can edit this out, right? Sort of recently, I had a new relationship forming with a girl who's in a bunch of bands, and she was in the studio recording during a few of the weeks that we were dating, and we were talking every day about the whole process and sharing music back and forth, things we like, and I was playing trumpet riffs on my trumpet and sharing with her on a phone and stuff, and we had this dialogue going about like this album that she was making or whatever. Well, a few weeks ago, again, there was a new innovation that came out that gave you the ability to clone your voice, but inside music in Suno. So I took my trumpet riffs, I took my real life voice, I took essentially our chat logs or my own journals and stuff, and I wrote some AI wrote some legit lyrics that sounded like I wrote them, that were about my life, right?
Yeah.
And then sang them through my deep fake voice and there with my trumpet there and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was presenting it to her as a continued dialogue exploration of the things that we had been exploring together. Like, hey, here's all that shit, kind of and my take on it. And here's some exploration. And I'm really hungry right now to have new places to experiment with my methodologies and my processes and stuff. So at first she was like, yeah, not that into it. And then one day she's like, this scares me a little bit. I'm like, yeah, it scares me too. That's what the songs are about. Listen, actually, that's actually the
lyrics.
that's what the songs are about. But she hated it.
Yeah, she hated it.
Yeah. It facilitated a quick demise of our connection in that she, I wasn't, when she said she was fearful of it, she didn't mean the same thing I meant when I'm fearful of it in this one hand, and I'm also curious and intrigued and trying to mess with it and all these things. But so just
thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, be careful. Be careful. This stuff's real. And it does have the power to do damage to some of the relationships we care about the most. Right? We're talking about trust, how we represent ourselves, the ability to remix our own thoughts and words and ideas and stuff like that. So it's just you definitely want to be slow, measure twice, cut once, be full transparency.
I love that.
It's never been a better moment to do the whole build in public thing, which is maybe one of the things that's been attractive to me about you since the beginning is before I'd ever been to the House of Owl, or maybe even before you even started, you started talking about wanting to do this and that you were going to do it and you were just coming together to do it. And simply by sharing that and being transparent in public, you can course correct along the way. You can figure out where to bump into other things, and you can be like, hey,
Yeah, you can make all the mistakes.
My bad.
Totally.
So, I think that, keeping communication, transparency, authenticity high, being careful about the relationships you trust the most, you care about the most, and just using it as a way more than anything to build up trust and creativity and kind of some of those more soft skills.
Yeah, that's beautifully said too. And I also, I'm just thinking out loud. This is very off script, but I'm wondering, a lot of the art, I think sometimes the rub comes from the fact that these artists who engage in these creative flows, it does feel, or it can feel spiritual, and it can feel a connection to spirit or something greater than yourself that's flowing through. And somewhere along the lines, we took that experience and brought it into a world of capitalism and efficiency and productivity, and let's pump out more, and let's and so, I mean, if it had stayed as only a spiritual practice, if music and dance and remained as a spiritual practice, I don't know if it could have ever been, if we would even consider the idea of it being threatened as a thing. You know, you can't, AI can
Form
do
a choir.
Yeah, okay, exactly. Like it's not, AI is never going to, I'm never going to choose to have it meditate for me. Meditation is my spiritual practice. I'm here for the process of it, not for the end result. And so I wonder if we kind of, you know, because we entered into that conversation of productivity and efficiency and pushing out art, we sort of tripped on the way in, and now we're dealing with AI, which is very productive and efficient, and something kind of started to rub wrong in the way, you know, if
I think that we have probably hyper optimized into these areas that make us super successful as like humans that are based on the context of the world we live in, which is kind of the factory innovation model of like you put some stuff in, it moves through the process and something comes out the other side. Yeah. Like, what if we're not meant to be like human encyclopedias and spreadsheets? And like, what if we gave up the 14 or 16 years that we train our kids to become encyclopedias and spreadsheets, and instead we taught them to be intuits, empaths, relation people, and communicators, you know, or something like that, or bridge builders, you know, like collaborators, you know. What if instead of efficiency we value collaborative, you know, relational resonance or something like this? So I think that, but that's to be careful to not discount the pain between here and there. So it's likely that we've hyper indexed on all this stuff that might not actually be that important in the grand scheme of what it means to be human. Yeah. But it makes us very successful now.
Absolutely.
But between here and when the pendulum kind of falls into the middle, shit, man, like, everything's up for grabs, you know? There's people with mortgages and kids in school with not just jobs that are going away, but careers. And identities and whole like you know, accumulated work experience that has been now like absorbed into machines without their consent, you know, and stuff. So it's going to be a very disorienting time. Yeah. And I think that, you know, holding like compassion for each other as we're all on different stages of this journey around like relationship to AI and the future and tech and all this stuff, and we're getting info from a lot of different sources, and it's pretty hard to see over the horizon. And so it's like, what better time to practice like humility around our own ideas and stuff like that, empathy for what other people might be going through with this experience, and just trying to have compassion and like coming together, man. It really seems to be 100%. Like where it's at. Like, it's probably why the House of Owl is like sitting pretty as well. It's like in a land of synthetic everything where all this shit can be generated by, you know, hive minds out there in Silicon Valley land. Well, what matters the most is like probably having physical spaces to safely come together in trusted environments and make sense of the world around us, man. Like,
I think this is a great place to wrap up. So I've got one final question for you. I'll put it into two different ways, and you can choose which one you want to answer. So either what's important to you right now, or what is sacred to you right now?
I think it's that human connection and relationship that I just told you about, the thing that I think will buttress us or be that life raft against not just uncertainty, but profoundly increasing pace of like change. Like this change that we just felt that we're walking through right now, it's going to like accelerate. That's going to be the defining moment of the time, is that the AIs we're using right now, they were built by humans, but the next AIs are going to be built by AIs. And then you start to really get on a curve, right? And so like, well, what do you do when that's where you're living? And it's like the best thing I can figure out is to walk into the future holding hands with the people around me, you know, trying to be like, yo, we're stronger together than I am by myself. And so that's where I'm placing my bets.
Love it. I'll place them right there too.
Man.
All right.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you. Now, if people want to, you know, engage in this conversation further with you, where can they go? Websites or? Yeah,
the best place to go would be to bc-ai.ca. That's our nonprofit ecosystem. Right. That'll lead you down in my whole world. But you spell my name with 2 Ks, Kriskrug. You drop that in Google and see what the goddess has in store for you, man.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah.
All right, my friends. We'll see you again. Thanks for connecting. Be well, be wild, and be yourself every once in a while. Good night.
House of Owl.
House of Owl. Ooh. How's it looking there? Is it?
Did you press the red button?
Did you press the? He's got it. He's got it.
Have you ever done one of these?